Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Night of Darkness by Kinley Macgregor, narrated by Antony Ferguson. Prologue. It has been said by the wise that in the heart of every man there lies a noble beast who seeks to do what is right. But before he becomes a man, he is a child, a boy. In the best of circumstances, that child is conceived in love, and he is nurtured so that he can grow to manhood, to be noble and kind, and fulfill his destiny. And then there are others, those who are conceived in darkness and deceit, those who are suckled on bitterness and hatred. These are not noble beasts. They are fierce and angry. They are feral lions bent on the destruction of all. These men grow to resent those around them, not by choice, but because whenever they dared to reach out to anyone for comfort, they were met with more anger and hostility, with scorn and brutality. It is all they know, all they've ever learned. These men are what they are exposed to, for good, for bad, for evil. How do I know? I'm one of those beasts. Meant to be a son of light, I was born of the darkest arts. Torn between the two, I've never known peace or succor, never known a gentle touch. Malice, cruelty, rage, those are what nurtured me into what I am today. Not noble, but definitely a beast. One who stalks this life in search of those like me who walk the path of evil, so that I can expose them for what they really are. And once they are known to us, it is by my hand that they die. I am fortitude. I am sinister. Most of all, I am hatred. It is what nourishes me more than mother's milk ever could. I would have it no other way. For it is that darkest part of my soul that allows me to do what I must. But whether I work for the betterment of mankind or the betterment of myself is anyone's guess. Even my own. Chapter 1.
There's a traitor among us.
With a completely stoic expression, Varian Dufay looked up from the desk where he was wasting time on a Sudoku puzzle to meet Merlin's worried gaze. As always, she was dressed in a long white medieval-styled gown that was trimmed in gold, while her pale flaxen hair fell around her shoulders and down her back like a mantle of silk. Unlike the Merlin who'd served King Arthur, Aquila Penmerlin was lithe and young, with a beauty that was only surpassed by her intelligence and magic. Scratching his chin, Varian merely arched a single brow at her agitated demeanor. "No shit, Sherlock. There's always a traitor among us." Closing the distance between them, she cradled his chin in her hand and forced him to look up at her. Those cold blue eyes bored into him, and by the sharp turn of her perfectly shaped lips, he could tell she didn't find his words amusing. Before he could move, she waved her hand in a circle before his face, causing a mist to form a ball in the air. As the mist swirled, it began to reveal an image. It showed a man in his mid-20s lying face down in a pool of his own blood. Only the blood wasn't red. It was a dark, sickly grey, as was everything in the picture. That told him that the body wasn't in the world of man or in Avalon. It was on the other side, the one that was controlled by unrelenting evil. Beautiful. Just beautiful. He could see right where this was heading, straight down a shitty road that ended with him getting screwed over. Again. He must truly be a masochist, otherwise he'd get up right now, tell her to shove it and leave. If only it were that easy. Varian narrowed his gaze on the man's body. Dressed in the chainmail armor and dark surcoat that were common for mid-12th century England, the dead man had one arm outstretched toward an old stone building, as if he'd been reaching for help when he'd died. Not that anyone in that particular realm would ever stoop to help someone, at least not unless an obscene amount of money had changed hands. But that wasn't what disturbed Varian. nor did he care that it was obvious from the bruises and cuts that the man had been severely beaten and tortured before death had spared him. What made his heart stop beating was the sight of where the knight's armor had been torn free of his left shoulder blade, to reveal the tattoo of a dragon encircled by fire rising out of a goblet. There were only a handful of men who bore that mark, and their names were a very carefully guarded secret. More than that, they were men who'd been imbued with extremely strong magic. That alone should have kept the dead man safe from whatever had killed him. Merlin nodded as she released him and stepped back.
Terence of Essex. Morgan's modes seized him before I could dispatch aid. They dragged him from his home in medieval England through the Vale into Glastonbury, where they killed him.
Little wonder that. He personally knew several of Morgan's minions of death, and they were a hardy bunch who lived for the opportunity to kill anything. To be unleashed against an original Knight of the Round Table was something they would sell their own mothers for. There was nothing they loved more than to bathe in the blood of their enemies. Or their friends either, for that matter. "Did they learn anything from him?" he asked Merlin. The worry returned to her brow.
I don't know. No one does, except the modes or Morgan. That's why I need you.
How he hated those words. He'd long grown tired of being Merlin's tool. She was forever asking him to ferret out traitors and information from the other side, and when the traitor needed executing, that too was his job. Honestly, he wanted to absolve himself from these distasteful tasks. He was tired of being caught between Merlin and Morgan. "You don't need me for this."
Yes, I do. From the way his armor was torn from his shoulder, it appears they knew to look for the mark. Someone had to tell them of it, and if Morgan has learned that, then she knows how to identify the remaining Grail Knights. We are all in danger, Varian. You are in danger.
He had to stamp down an extremely sarcastic "duh" at her dire tone. He was always in danger from someone or something, so what? Even now he lived among his enemies, and they made no bones about the fact that none of them would mourn his death. "You can't scare me, Merlin," he said quietly. "I'm too old for ghost stories, and I really don't give a rat's ass about Morgan or her flock. If they want to come for me, notify the Undertaker. He'll need to stock up on body bags."
Then you don't care that the rest of the Grail Knights are to be slaughtered like animals?
He met her question with one of his own. "Should I?" She shook her head at him.
As fellow members of the Round Table, they are your brothers.
Yeah, right. None of them had any more care for him than he had for them. If the tables were turned, they'd hand him over without a second thought. "Tell that to them." Merlin reached out a kind hand to touch his forearm. She alone knew that kindness was one of the few things that could render him weak. He'd had so little experience with it that it baffled him, and he never knew how to react.
"Please, Varian, for me. You're the only one I trust to go inside Glastonbury and look around for information. I have a traitor who told Morgan about that tattoo and Terence. Only you can find out what the modes learned before they executed him. Not to mention someone needs to bring his body home for a proper burial. It's the least we can do for one of our own."
How easy she made it sound, but Glastonbury was no place for a man like him. Then again, maybe it was. Back before Arthur had fallen under Mordred's sword, Glastonbury and its abbey had been places of beauty. Now they existed in a netherrealm between Avalon and Camelot. Nothing with any kind of decency lived there. Nothing. It was hell, and he'd rather have his nostrils slit than ever step foot in there again. But before he could tell her that, the door to the lounge room opened to admit 3 men. Like him, they were remnants of King Arthur's Round Table. Adamar, Gareth, and the aptly named Bors, who was in fact extremely boring. Bors' father had been a cousin to Varian's. Side by side their fathers had once fought. Unfortunately, that brotherhood was lost on their sons, who couldn't stand each other. "I see you found our traitor, Merlin," Adamar sneered as he raked Varian with a lethal glare. He had slicked back brown hair and sharp pinched features that reminded Varian of a mouse. At 5'6", the knight carried himself as if he were equal to a giant's height, and had the skill to back that arrogance, which he didn't. Only 3 inches taller than Adamar, Gareth was stout, with beady brown eyes and dark brown hair. He moved to stand closer to Varian so that he could make his disdain known. Not that Varian hadn't known Gareth hated him. He'd have to be completely stupid to miss that. "Like father, like son." That stung, but not for the reasons Gareth thought. It wasn't Lancelot's treachery that bothered Varian. It had been his father's cruelty. Varian leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms over his chest as he offered the men a blank stare. "If you wish to pick a fight with me, don your armor and meet me in the list. I don't need words to goad me to kick your asses. Hell, I won't even use my powers to beat you. Be good to get blood on my hands again."
"Varian," Merlin said sternly as she moved back a step, "we don't need trouble while we have a critical situation brewing. There are only 5 Grail Knights left. If Morgan learns the location of the Grail—" She didn't finish her sentence. There was no need. Without the bloodline, there would be no one to stand before Morgan and defeat her. The Grail held secrets and a primordial power so great that it would render the person who commanded it indestructible. That was why it, unlike the other sacred objects Arthur had used to rule Britain, had more than one protector to hide it. Each one of the Grail Knights held a direct tie to the power that had created the Grail, and each of them was entrusted with a single clue that could lead to its hiding place. No one on this earth knew where the Grail was hidden. No one. But if Morgan gained the single clue from each of the 6 knights, then she would have the Grail's location. And Varian had seen enough of her magic to know exactly what that would mean to the world. Why do I care? He had no idea, but the pathetic truth was that he did. Glancing up at Merlin, he projected his next thought to her alone. I need to know who I protect. Sadness darkened her eyes. You know I can't tell you that. It's not that I don't trust you, Varian, but should you fall into Morgan's hands, it is best that only I know the identities of the surviving Grail Knights. She was right. If Morgan were to torture him, he couldn't guarantee that he wouldn't betray them to get her to stop. He'd made selling out friends and allies his life's ambition. Fine. Getting up, he closed his Sudoku book. "That's right," Adamar said, twisting his lips. "Slink back into whatever hole you climbed out of." Merlin tensed. "Adamar, you should be grateful that I still hold sway over Varian. But if you continue this, I won't rein him in. Woe to you should he ever be unleashed."
Adamar scoffed. "I don't fear demon spawn. I destroy them." Varian laughed at that as he paused beside the knight who barely reached his shoulder. He took a deep breath so that he could smell the man's fear and sweat. "The prideful only boast to cover their cowardice. You may not fear demon spawn, Addy, but you do fear me." Adamar started for him, only to have Bors pull him back. Tall and lean, Bors had features very similar to Varian's. "He's not worth it, brother." The humor fled Varian as he met his cousin's gaze. They were family, but more than that, they were enemies, and bitter ones at that. "It's true, Addy," Varian said with a note of amusement. "Attacking me isn't worth your life, and that is the price I'd demand for it." He turned to look at Merlin. I'll go and do your bidding, Merlin, but my patience and willingness to be your lapdog is stretching perilously thin.
Understood, Varian. But know that you have my gratitude.
Her gratitude and their scorn. That just made him feel all warm and toasty inside. But then he couldn't blame them for hating him. He'd been born cursed. The son of Arthur's most beloved knight and the son of Arthur's most bitter enemy. Unlike the others, he had blood loyalty to both sides of this conflict, and it was a loyalty both sides didn't hesitate to abuse. He paused at the door to look back at Merlin. "You know there is one good thing in all this?" Merlin gave him a puzzled stare.
"And that is?"
Varian indicated Adamar with a jerk of his chin. "At least my mother didn't give me a name that sounded like a bad candy bar." He stepped through and shut the door an instant before a dagger embedded itself right where his head had been. He stared at the tip of the dagger, which had pierced all the way through the wood, and gave a sinister laugh. Honestly, he wasn't his father's son so much as he was his mother's. There was nothing in life he enjoyed more than taunting others. Nothing he liked more than feeling the blood of his enemies coating his hands. But not before he'd had ample time to torture them. Kindness, compassion. The lords of Avalon could shove that up their collective asses. Battle, mayhem, insults, those were his business, and he thrived on them. Varian waved his hand over his clothes, changing them from his black shirt and jeans to the medieval attire that was needed to venture to the Abbey. His dark brown leather jerkin was heavy, but not nearly as much as the mail shirt that whispered metallically against his skin. He pulled into place the studded black leather vambrace that held a metal insert to protect his forearm from a sword strike, and rested his hand against the hilt of his sword. To search this out, he'd have to go into the Glastonbury Abbey itself. On the human side of the veil, the Abbey was nothing but ruins. Behind the veil, it was still thriving, only there was no godliness in that place. It was unholy. It was also a neutral zone where no magic would work. No one was really sure why, but Varian suspected that it had to do with the fact that when Camelot and Avalon had been pulled out of the mortal realm into one of the Fey, Glastonbury was supposed to have been left untouched, as ignorant of the defection of the two places as the rest of the world. Instead, the magic had accidentally seeped over into their village, sucking them out along with the positive and negative magic that made up Avalon and Camelot. Now he was heading into a place where his magic was useless, which was probably why the Modes had killed Terence there. It was one of the few places where the Grail Knight would have been without his magic to fight off his attackers. In Glastonbury, only the skill of Varian's sword arm could help him. That and his willingness to ruthlessly kill anyone who annoyed him. Oh yeah, it was good to be evil. Chapter 2. Glastonbury Abbey was a cesspit of human filth and debauchery. But back in the day when Avalon and Camelot had been part of the human world, it had been a marvel of engineering and beauty. The ribbed vaulting of the nave had been painted bright colours and gilded until it shone like the very sun. The stained glass windows had been a riot of colour that caught every ray of sunshine before spilling it in brilliant rainbows against the stone floors. People had journeyed from all over just for a chance to see it. The monks who'd called it home had taken great care to keep up its beauty. Their voices had once rung out in a cappella chants like an angelic choir. But that was then. Now it existed in a shadowy realm where there was no colour at all, only shades of dismal grey. And it had been brought here by sheer accident. In the original plan, only Camelot and Avalon were supposed to have been taken behind the veil to conceal them from the world of mankind, in order to protect that world from the evil that had infected this one. But Dame Fortune wasn't always kind, and Glastonbury, along with her prestigious abbey, had been taken behind the veil too. Unaware of what was happening on that fateful night when Avalon and Camelot were concealed, numerous men and women had been caught in the middle of this battle and been trapped here, out of time. In the human world, their families had assumed they'd run off or died. But in this world, they still lived through the centuries and remembered a time when their world had been vast, and they could leave Glastonbury or Camelot as they pleased. But that was lost to them. Banned by accident from the realm of Avalon, their only choice now was to live in Glastonbury or to venture into the lands of Camelot, which were fraught with evil beings who lived only to torture and kill those foolish enough to approach them. For obvious reasons, the occupants of Glastonbury chose to stay in the limited neutral zone. Yet with every passing year, their neutrality dwindled, and the inhabitants were beginning to look more and more like the twisted souls who called Camelot home. It was a shame, really. At one time they'd been mostly decent people, but then in times of war it was always the innocent who suffered most, and in this war they were the innocent bystanders who'd been caught between the two most powerful forces on earth. If one stood at the northernmost tower of the Abbey or the Tor, they could glimpse the division of the lands. To the left was the curtain of light and colour that delineated Avalon. To the right was the dark grey world that was Morgan's Camelot. It should be easy to cross the line of demarcation, but looks were definitely deceiving. To the soulless and damned beings who lived in Camelot, the light of Avalon was truly painful. It burned so much that only a small handful of them could bear it. For those who lived in Avalon, the darkness was something to fear. It was said that any who dared to venture to it would be consumed by it. To live in darkness was to surrender all that was good inside you. The dark was a vicious mistress who demanded the sacrifice of morals and decency. And in the middle of those two lands was this one. Banished to eternal night, there was no colour here, any more than there was in Camelot. The sky fluctuated from black to a drab grey. Days blurred together, as the townsfolk tried to find any solace from their fate that they could. But there wasn't much to be had. And just like the inhabitants of Camelot, they, too, despised those who lived in Avalon. At one time, Merewyn of Mercia had lived in the realm of the light. Not in Avalon itself, for that was something she'd never even known existed. No, she'd lived in the land of Mercia as a princess. More beautiful even than Helen of Troy, she'd been the most sought-after girl of her time, and had been forced to watch men kill one another just for a chance to see her smile. She'd hated every minute of it. And when her father had told her that the time had come for her to marry a man who saw nothing more than her beauty, she'd summoned one of the creatures that called the darkness home. With magic best left untouched, she'd conjured one of the Antony, an elfin race so cruel that even demons feared them. In the light of a full moon, Merewyn had made a bargain that had haunted her ever since. She'd traded her beauty for freedom, or so she thought. A sore bargain that, for Merewyn had had no idea of the repercussions that would come. Now she was in the Abbey, hidden behind a wall with her mistress, the very being who'd stolen her beauty and enslaved her. She ached to know what they were doing here in the bar, but didn't dare ask. Her mistress didn't tolerate questions. Then again, her mistress tolerated very little. With an envious eye, she stared at her mistress's long, curly blonde hair. All of the Antony were beautiful, but even by their exceptional standards, Narishka stood out. Petite and curvy, she was what every man dreamed of touching, and what every woman dreamed of being. Except for the blackness of her soul, which was only matched by that of her heart. "Get me more wine, worm." Merewyn blinked at the unexpected order. That delayed reaction cost her, as Narishka backhanded her. "Are you deaf as well as ugly, chit? Move!" Her cheek stinging, Merewyn grabbed the goblet from in front of Narishka and scurried away before her mistress struck her again. She hated her limping gait that was caused by one leg being shorter than the other, an accident that had happened the only time she'd ever tried to escape her cruel mistress. She glanced back through the wall to see if Narishka was watching her, but she couldn't tell. The wall completely concealed Narishka's presence. "Watch where you're going, hag!" She stiffened at the harsh words of the knight she'd almost brushed against in her haste.
"Beg pardon, sir."
Still he shoved her away from him, into the back of another man. Turning, the man cursed, and screwed his features up in distaste as he saw her hideously pockmarked face and matted hair. "Get off me, you heinous gorgon!" Then he, too, shoved her away, into a table where a group of men were dicing. This time her collision caused drink to spill all over the man whose arm she bumped. Cursing, he rose from his chair, twisting a circular dagger on his index finger as he glared his hatred at her. Merewyn tensed in expectation of the dagger slicing through her body. But just as he would have plunged it into her, he was spun about to confront another man, one who held her attacker's hand and dagger so that they were harmless. Her jaw went slack, not from fear, but from speechless awe. The newcomer was tall and lean, with the greenest eyes she'd ever seen in her life. As clear as a scrying crystal, they seemed to glow from a face that was so perfectly sculpted he should be Antony. Indeed, he had the lethal manner of that race, but no Antony would ever bother saving something like her. His curly black hair brushed against his shoulders in a haphazard manner that said he wasn't one to be overly concerned with his looks, as did the whiskers that darkened his tanned cheeks and accentuated the slight cleft in his chin. Without a word, he used his studded vambrace to twist the dagger from her would-be attacker's hand and knocked him back. The man staggered against the table, then rushed toward her savior. But before he could reach him, another man shoved him away. "That's Varian le Fey you're attacking, Hugh. Think long and hard." Merewyn snapped her jaw shut at the name that was legendary among the evil beings who called Camelot home. It was said he was demon spawn who lived on the blood of his enemies, that he'd sold his soul to the devil, or to Arthur de Danann, so that no man would ever be able to defeat him in battle, that he'd killed his own brother just so that he could learn Antony magic and feed his own powers. But even worse, it was said that he knew magic so black that even Morgan feared him. Those were only a few of the numerous stories that told of his insatiable cruelty. And by the evil twist of his lips, as he watched Hugh like a man eyeing a fly he intended to kill, she could believe every one. "What's the matter, Hugh?" Varian taunted in a deep, resonant tone that went down her spine like warm velvet. "You only attack those who can't fight back. What say you try to carve me a little?" Hatred flared in Hugh's eyes, but he knew better than to respond. Rumor claimed Varian le Fey used the entrails of his victims as laces for his boots and armor. He was one of the few beings who could walk between Avalon and Camelot, because neither Merlin nor Morgan dared to confront him. Hugh spat on the ground before he sheathed his dagger at his waist and retook his seat. Varian glanced around at the others, who were frozen in tense stances, and as his gaze fell to each one, they looked away nervously before they returned to what they'd been doing. That alone spoke volumes about the man's skill and powers. She saw the satisfaction in Varian's crystal green eyes before he bent to pick up the goblet she dropped on the floor. To her complete shock, he handed it to her, and if she didn't know better, she'd swear his face actually softened as his gaze met hers. Still, she noted the pity in his eyes as he saw how deformed she was. "You'd best be on your way, lass. A little more carefully this time." the single word that acknowledged her as a woman, and
Sample complete. Ready to continue?